Testing 1.
Testing 2.
Testing 3.
Testing 4.
Brilliant. He's done this before. Welcome, everybody, to the Test Him Male Fertility Podcast, where we talk all things sperm. Today, we are joined by an absolute legend in the space of male factor fertility.
Definitely.
The legendary Jonathan Ramsay. Welcome to the Test Him Podcast. How are you today?
Very well, thanks, Toby, and it's nice to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Really, really good to be here, because I think Mike and I, and later you two, were sort of first in the space of trying to push the water uphill, as it was then, which was to get the males recognised.
Absolutely. And that's what we're all here to do today. So, and to discuss things about sperm. So, yeah, it's wonderful to have you here.
Yeah, we're all a bit excited, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's almost like
tickles.
Christmas morning, because it is ridiculously early.
Yeah.
And we've got the Santa Claus of male fertility here.
We have.
We have.
Nobody's ever asked me to make sperm exciting.
But
this is a new challenge.
but it is.
Yeah.
But it is.
Sperm is exciting.
But I think it's exciting what we're doing in this space, you know, with your voice and others, in terms of actually, okay, like I say, let's push this water uphill, let's actually change the narrative and get men aware of their fertility, get them the right tests, and that's really what we're trying to do, obviously, here with Test Him. But I think it is exciting. I think it's an exciting time in the fertility world. I mean, obviously, you've been in it a little bit longer, perhaps, politely saying, than I have. Kind of, what's it been like for you in terms of seeing how male fertility has kind of developed over the years?
Oh, it's a great question, Ian, because I am so old that I was training long before there was IVF available. IVF, let alone ICSI, available to anybody. So I was training as a urologist when Louise Brown was being born.
Goodness.
When Steptoe and his colleagues overcame a straightforward infertility problem where the issue was tubal blockage, so it was an obstructive, it was a mechanical thing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there was IVF needing quite a lot of sperm, so it wasn't suitable for the severe male factor infertility, where perhaps there was only 3 or 4 million sperm. For IVF, you needed more than that, and particularly when it started. So Louise Brown was a pure female factor. Then it became mostly female factors, and it wasn't until ICSI injecting single sperm was possible, which was discovered by mistake.
It was, yeah.
Oh, was it?
I remember
I
that.
didn't know that. There you go. You always learn, don't we?
Just like penicillin.
Experimental. It was very experimental.
Really?
No, nothing controlled about it at all.
All right.
So, but that, you see, like that wasn't until, I think, about 91, 92.
That's right, yeah.
So, up until that time, urologists were involved with seeing men who were subfertile or infertile, diagnosing what they could. Often that was a varicocele, overt infections, and treating them. In those days, we were very interested in antibodies to sperm, something that's been completely forgotten more recently. But the important thing is that from 91, 92, all the men were in the fertility units because ICSI was held as being a possible treatment for men with very low sperm counts. And therefore we didn't see them.
Right.
So the subject of male fertility for urologists was beginning, even for urologists, to slip off the horizons.
Goodness me.
Because the men, the advice from general practitioners, the advice from the government was that if there is 1 year or 18 months or 2 years infertility, and if the couple want treatment, you, the general practitioner, do some simple tests, fill in a form, and send them to the local fertility unit. So the men never appeared for investigation in their own right. So as time passes from 91 onwards, urologists, mainstream urologists, are not seeing infertile men. They actually become consumed with PSA testing and the prostate and how you have your prostate operated on. And their targets at the same time, for urologists to be dealing with patients who might have urological cancers, and this completely deflects them from the rather time-consuming business of dealing with men with infertility, particularly as they're not actually in the clinic at all.
Yeah. So kind of how's that then played out over the last 30 years to where we are today?
Well, it simply means now that there are relatively few urologists who have done any training in male fertility. Because in order to get the training, you've got to be in one of the big centres that takes tertiary referrals, or where men sort of spin out of a fertility clinic.
Right, yeah.
And they seek a referral in their own right for example, because they've got some swelling in their scrotum, like a varicocele, or they've got a bit of pain, or they have some urinary symptoms possibly associated with infertility. So, and then particularly if you're in a big city, London, for example, you might end up at UCLH or Imperial or Guy's Thomas's, where there are a little group of 2, 3 or 4 urologists who have enough practice to concentrate on male infertility. But if you're somewhere else in the country, there just might be a urologist who's been through one of those units in his training. But then to maintain the practice, of course, you need lots and lots of patients. And if you don't get lots and lots of patients, because the majority are still in the fertility unit having ICSI, and why not, because it may work, then you don't sustain the practice.
It's quite a difficult challenge, isn't it?
It's a huge challenge. So you know, I can hear inequality already outside of large, institutions or large cities. That, we know the prevalence of male fertility is 1 in 7, or 1 in 14 actually, is 1 in 7 for couple infertility, isn't it? But that is huge. It's a huge disparity, inequitable sort of access to subspeciality urologists or andrologists that can actually help them along their journey.
No, you're quite right, Mike. I have thought of this quite a lot, really, though not being influential in the Society of Urologists anymore. How can one get round this? Well, if a urologist trained in andrology, male fertility, could dedicate an afternoon a week to be in the local fertility unit, that would probably then bring the male side to the fore, because it would be part of what was naturally going on in the fertility unit. Now, I used to do that at Chelsea Westminster and at Hammersmith. So, and I know that even when a urologist is sitting there and is welcoming next door to the gynecologists, still when you see the couple in the fertility unit, there is a pressure, an inbuilt pressure to get on with a cycle of IVF or ICSI because you're there.
Well, it's taken years for them to get to that point, hasn't it, usually?
The loopholes and hurdles you've got to get to get to that point, isn't it? And you're pressured as a couple to want the outcome as soon as possible, right? That's that's part of it, the equation, isn't it?
I mean, if you willingly walk into a wine bar, you'll end up with a glass of wine.
That's a good analogy.
It's
thankfully, there's alcohol-free ones now, so you don't feel too bad walking in there. It's really interesting because, I do a lot of work with rare diseases, and rare diseases often have a similar type of nature where you end up needing these specialist interest, centres of excellence, really, pockets where patients can go to, often within an hour, 2 hours of, that centre being available to them. So do we think that we need to think about centres of excellence around the UK or elsewhere where men can go to get the right subspeciality referral pathway to see patients? Because I don't think it's there at the moment, is it?
Well, it's certainly there in London. It's there in big cities where there are enough urologists and probably enough fertility services for an individual, maybe even two, to break away a bit from mainstream urology and give some time to this subject.
Yeah.
And those trainees who've been through those centres, of course, are well placed to pick up that function. But it's all about the volume of patients.
Yes, you've got to provide the supply, haven't you, and the demand.
When it comes to it, in so many parts of medicine and surgery, volume drives quality.
So we're in a bit of a catch-22 because men aren't being sent for urology assessments and fertility assessments because it's not part of the NICE pathway. They don't know about this stuff independently, so they don't ask for it. So therefore you don't get that drive for those services. So therefore you don't get the specialists training, and there's no demand for them to fill. So it's almost a catch-22 in some ways, isn't it?
Well, I think what you're doing, which is through Test Him creating that awareness, means that men can, in their own right, go to their GPs and say, look, I don't think this is right. Maybe they've had some Test Him tests. Maybe they know that their testosterone is a bit low, FSH is a bit high. Maybe they've done your questionnaire and they say, yes, I've got a bit of aching around my left testicle, and when I stand up in front of the mirror, that side of the scrotum does look a bit large. Perhaps I have got a varicocele. And then they go to the GP and say, I'd like to see a urologist because... And then most general practitioners will say, yes, okay. But of course, it'll take quite some time.
Of course, that's the big problem, isn't it? Long time.
Yeah, but I think we've seen quite a shift. To be fair, because Ian and I obviously have been working quite a lot in this space, raising awareness for male fertility from certainly from my perspective as a patient voice, and I think we are seeing a bit more of a shift now, aren't we? Some of the guys that we talk to and making that awareness about these particular conditions, because we're giving men the voice and we're empowering them to actually go, yes, that might be me. That they're more likely to go and see a specialist. Because I think that certainly from my own background, I was aware of perhaps there was something going on, but I was like, I did the guy thing. I'm fine. Don't need to worry about that. I don't need to see anyone. And we do that as men, don't we? We do. We often
hide away from
an issue
problems, don't we?
In health, and we often just bury our head in the sand. Just go, I'll be fine tomorrow. It'll be okay. But actually, in fertility, the outcome is absolutely life changing for the better, hopefully. And so. That's what we've got to do, and empower men to actually get checked and
to not be scared and speak up.
Well, I think that's what you are doing. I mean, having joined your Wednesday evening group right at the beginning and more recently, I can see two things. Self-evidently, there are more men, but perhaps more importantly, they're more vocal.
Yeah,
there are fewer men who are just sitting and listening, which is the way it was to begin with.
Yeah, the first one you came on, it was very quiet, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I think, it's a bit like contagion and catching viruses. For every one apostle that you recruit, that he will get through social media to 10 others.
Correct.
And then we've got 10. And 10 times 10.
We just keep doing that.
So I've got a feeling that vehicle is probably as effective or more effective than almost anything else.
It's that rolling stone, isn't it? Really, it's starting that little snowball at the top of an avalanche, the top of a mountain, and then creating an avalanche at the bottom and affecting so many people at the bottom. That's fundamentally what we really want to do.
Yeah, I'm really curious actually, because obviously your career is very, very long and varied, and obviously you've gone right from the beginning of when IVF was created to this point now. How has that male factor perspective from a patient, has it changed? What was the kind of attitude like among men pre-IVF before there was effectively that almost silencing with the kind of ICSI process to where we're at now? Obviously we are changing things and making more of a conversation, but was there kind of a shame for men to talk about fertility? Because I know I was ashamed for a while. I felt very unempowered to talk about.
Well, it's very interesting. You see, there were two things, opposing things, at work in the 70s and 80s before the fertility unit effect.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, in those days, men were even less likely to talk about their condition.
Mm-hmm.
And families didn't talk about, genitalia.
Mm-hmm.
This was the private area in the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nobody mentioned it.
No.
So in the 70s and 80s, there was much more reluctance for men to come forward on their own.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, if you have a urological clinic that routinely sees men, let us say, with varicocele, so there are loads of men there. The waiting room's full of men. And in those days, the partners, the women, didn't tend to come along too.
That's interesting,
So-
isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Because it was still the private area in the front.
Yeah, segregation.
They wouldn't want to. So they felt better once they got there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I suspect that getting there was probably more difficult psychologically, although the GPs were referring them.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge though, isn't it, mentally, to actually accept that there could be something there and actually go over that line and actually ask for that help. And then once you're in that help, you're in like a rabbit in the headlights. You're just going like, I've no idea what's going to happen now. Because, these are your crown jewels that you've been, used to for very long, and you're going to have to let them loose with somebody else. And that's it's quite scary, isn't it, really?
Yeah, because I remember when you did our first evening when you talked about various male factor fertility things, and Ian and I afterwards spoke about our fertility journey, and it was kind of alluding to the fact that actually, do you know what, I now need to get myself checked, because there was some things that you said in that evening that was like, this is ringing all too close to home, and maybe I need to get looked at myself. But I remember having the conversation with you about initially having DNA screening and to get an ultrasound, and this was even prior to actually booking an appointment with yourself, and I remember putting it off for a good couple of months because I was so scared of the outcome, and when those results came back that it was evident that I had varicocele and I had high levels of DNA fragmentation, and then I arranged an appointment with you, I was so nervous that day, nervous. I didn't need to be. As soon as I met you, I felt very, very comfortable. But it is something that is quite scary to accept there might be an issue, but also something that is quite intimate and quite a private thing, isn't it?
Well, it's really useful to me, Toby, to be reminded of that. Yes, it's easy for me to say I'm aware of it, but we need reminding because the urologists, the specialists, we sort of forget to say the obvious, which is, for example, when you're having a scan, we're really not looking for lumps and bumps and cancers. In your case, having examined you, this is about a varicocele, and that is a benign condition. And we forget to say things that are so obvious to us.
Yes, you're doing it every day, aren't you?
Yeah, but are not obvious to the owner of the varicocele, because all of us think, oh, crikey, I'm having a scan. Could find anything.
Yeah.
Could be anything in there.
Exactly. I think that's the fear, though, isn't it, really? And we have a lot of fear about, our own genitalia.
And unfortunately, we're in this world of Google now, and you can't help, I certainly couldn't help at the time, Googling, this lump. And obviously it was a varicocele, but you do have this moment of, what if it is? What if it's
can we demystify it then? So a guy's decided, okay, I want to get my fertility checked, and he books in to see you or another urologist, andrologist. What would he expect? What would actually happen when he turns up? Because clearly he's going to be a bit scared.
Sure. So he either comes with a story of the couple not having conceived. He might just come with a story of multiple miscarriages. Or he comes with a semen analysis, which is suboptimal. But it's usually the story and a semen analysis often done by the GP, and not much else. It's very rare for a bloke to come along with testicular pain, although he might have contrived the pain as a reason to be there, as Toby was, as both of you were saying, as a sort of honourable excuse
to be there. Yeah.
But generally, we're talking about trying to conceive for a year, 18 months, and that interval is getting shorter, and a semen analysis.
Right.
And the interval between the visit to the GP and the semen analysis is getting shorter. And of course, the availability of semen analyses by other means is much more than it used to be.
Yeah.
And fertility units up and down the country are now often offering semen analyses without the necessity to enter a treatment program. Of course, they know that you can always find something wrong with
the semen analysis. And
as soon as they've said, oh, yes, and shave, oh, dear, don't know about that, then they've got a couple of recruits.
Yeah.
But it's much, much commoner for a man to have had a semen analysis than it was 5 years ago,
Right, wow.
10 years ago, and certainly more than that.
Yeah.
So they come to you with a little bit of information.
Yes.
What happens then?
So, of course, the first thing to do is to calm them down.
Calm down.
Get off the ceiling.
And-
Come down, you're okay.
And also to observe whether, because they will usually, they'll come with their partner, because, of course, she's fixed it
Yep.
anyway.
Yep.
If they don't, you just got to take note of that. You know, why not?
Yeah.
And then, now they may think that this is males only. Yeah, that I don't want somehow to see their partners because I sort of do men.
Yeah.
I think we asked that, to be fair, with Alison. I think we did actually say, can Katie come? And she's very welcome. Yeah.
Exactly, and actually vital.
Yeah, really important because you've got to have both parts of the story, haven't you?
Exactly. So the first observation, it sounds trite, but how close are they sitting?
Yeah, I can believe it. Yeah,
Is he moving away or moving
what's the body
closer?
language?
What's
What's
going
the body
on
language?
here?
Yeah.
And then try and put him at ease. Don't get to the physical examination too quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just sat down. Right, take your pants off.
Yes, exactly. We don't want to have a rummage in the scrotum as first off. Otherwise, he's thinking, crikey, this can only get worse. So it's a thorough story,
Yeah.
a history, because they've got a story.
Yeah.
Everyone's got a story.
I think this is it, isn't it?
And there are little twists to the stories. They're not all the same.
No.
And then, of course, who are you going to get the story from? Well, if it's a complex story, and if this involves possibly a previous cycle of IVF or ICSI, then of course we do need the female partner.
Yes,
because I've yet to meet a man who remembers or knows how many eggs she produced,
Right.
and what happened to them.
Yeah.
Now, he'll know, of course, if there were embryos put back, roughly, but understanding the process and the statistics, it's a very unusual man who can do that.
I think that's true.
I like that.
It's either one ear in one ear and out the other, or it's like whoosh, sprayed over the top.
Exactly.
That's us as guys, isn't it?
Yeah.
We delete information that's not really relevant.
Yeah.
The one that put back is the bit that you count all your...
Whereas the woman's got the folder, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
She's
this cycle,
organised.
this cycle.
She has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose the other thing that people like me must do, if we're talking about the folder, the folder will have been sent, usually, all that data. So you really need to look at it before they come in.
too right.
You really, really do. You don't want to be caught on the hoof,
No.
sort of scrambling through.
That came up at that event I mentioned that I was at this week, where the HFEA were talking, and actually that was one of the other areas of complaint from patients, is that they go into a consultation and clearly the consultant hasn't read the notes, and they then have to relive that entire journey and all the trauma and all the history. It's kind of it's really important that you take that time, isn't it? To
But you've got to make that time.
yeah.
We are very bad at making time. And as we get more senior and more experienced, there is a danger in all specialties, certainly not just, it's right across the board, to do it on the hoof.
Yeah, get complacent.
And generally you get it right,
Yeah.
because you can assimilate data very, very quickly,
Yeah.
and you've seen it all before, and we can cut to the chase. But by doing that, you unnerve the couple.
Yeah.
They don't know that you're computing this very, very quickly, and actually you will come to the same conclusion as if you'd spent half an hour reading all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really reassuring, because I think when you've gone from, this is always talking from my experience, having gone through a couple of rounds of IVF, we've had losses, and obviously this was prior to seeing you. I throughout that process felt very silenced in gynecology appointments. I remember my semen analysis was being explained to Katie while I was sat in the room, like I wasn't there, like I was some kind of just random person. And actually that's really isolating and alienating. But I remember when we come and saw you, there was this almost weird sense of weight off our shoulder relief, that actually we felt like you got us and you understood us and you listened to us. And I think those really simple things can completely change the kind of perception of what the outcome might be. And I think that when you diagnosed my problem, you was very realistic to say that this will improve, not guarantee. And that was a really nice thing, because it was actually like, this is a realistic outlook of what could happen. We are doing the right things. We are making the right steps forward. And then whatever the outcome would be, whether baby or not, at least we would then rest assured that we've done everything we could possibly have done at that point. But until then, it very much felt like the entire time was just rabbit in the headlights. No one really cared for us, and we just felt like we was another number going through another IVF process. So we was very, very grateful for your time when we saw you, and to this day, I mean, you've changed my life, and I think it's a really important point to say on this podcast. Thank you so much, Jonathan, because quite honestly, you have changed my life, and every guy, in my opinion, should come and see you or someone like you, because so many men are just silenced in this world of fertility, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, that's very kind of you, Toby. No, I'm a very embarrassed urologist with headphones.
Welcome.
Yeah.
So, both of you, Ian and Toby, both of you have struck at the psychological effect of the fertility unit. This is an extraordinary thing if we just reflect upon it, because nowhere else in medicine is the outcome of an intervention, a big intervention, expensive intervention, absolutely binary. There is nothing between success and failure, joy and misery. Now, this doesn't happen in the rest of medicine. I mean, you can be as sick as a parrot, and we can do something, make you feel better. It's not, very, very seldom is it death on the one hand and eternal life on the other.
Yeah.
You know, so I think we are not good, actually, at handling that proposition from the word go. And so it's human nature then to hide in the process, which is exactly what Toby was saying. So we won't even look at the man, because actually we don't know anything about men, and we don't believe that anything to do with him will make any difference. But we can talk about why that is, because there's a basis for that. It's not, this isn't stupidity. So we won't look at him, because to engage means he'll ask me a question and I won't know the answer, or I'll have to make it up, or he'll challenge me about having a test that we don't have available. So better actually not to look at him. You know, you can see how this happens. So
Totally.
And I've experienced that firsthand as well, you know, and it takes a lot of guts actually to sort of challenge that status quo in a fertility clinic, because you know, you've got somebody there that has obviously trained for a very long time. You've come in there with the expectation that there's something that somebody can help with, because you've been referred there in the first instance. And I think in my case, because I did know a little bit about male infertility and some of the conditions that I had gone through, some of the information I was hearing back was, this is inconsistent with what I know. This is not really how I would imagine this consultation to go on. I asked a few questions, and it was exactly how you described. It was, well, I'm the doctor. I know what I've seen lots and lots of patients like you, and this is what we do. And I'll go, okay. And you know, immediately you come out of that consultation going like, I'm really not happy with that. I'm really not happy with that. So what can I do to think about that. And it's come up a few times with talking with the chaps. I think, education, self-awareness, getting yourself surrounded by good people that you're confident about talking with can actually start to break that chain a little bit and think about, well, what other options are there out there other than this route that I've been shoehorned into, because this is the guidelines, this is the NHS guidelines. You've got to go to a fertility clinic, and actually I know it's me. And
being confident enough to push back as well. I think if you're in a consultation and you're like, hang on a minute, I'm not sure about this. Yeah. I'm not happy about this. And certainly when I've, with my work with patients over the years, I've encouraged them to do that. It's like, actually, have you asked them about this? Have you thought about this? Making sure they are empowered to actually, push back a little bit if they're not happy or if they've got questions.
And I think the other thing that I've seen so many times is that there's not a standard approach in the sort of history taking, the journey, the path that people have gone through, and sometimes there's an insufficient time period, because everybody's constrained with time, to actually understand somebody's journey, somebody's actual medical history. What else are they doing in their lives beyond taking whatever medicines that they're doing, and could that be an impact on their lives? So I think that's one of the key things that I've seen, even in fertility clinics when we've been been out there, is that there is just no consistency at all. So that's one of the big challenges, I think, isn't it?
Yes. And once again, why should I defend my colleagues? Well, there is a basis for their apparent lack of interest and therefore apparent lack of knowledge. And it's a very interesting basis because, of course, what was recognized quite early on when ICSI started was that the outcome in terms of live births didn't seem to be dependent or altered by the results of a semen analysis, the parameters on a semen analysis. I suppose there was a little bit of variation if you tried to do IVF when there was very poor morphology, or indeed very poor motility. And it was quickly realized that in those circumstances we should do ICSI. Yeah? But once one's got down got down to ICSI and therefore rather poor parameters on a semen analysis, whether you've got 1 million sperm, 5 million, 20% motility, 10%, 1% morphology, and even worse than that, then the live birth rate is still dependent upon female age and not the semen analysis. So the extension of that, the extrapolation of that true fact was that therefore, if that is the case, if semen analysis doesn't determine live birth rate, then there's no point trying to improve it. Okay, so that seems to be a sequential statement. But of course, it misses a degree of logic which regards the man as an individual. So if you improve an individual's semen analysis, do you then alter the outcome? Now, if you think about trying to prove that, that is exceedingly difficult because what that means is that you're comparing the first cycle with this sort of semen analysis with the second cycle or third or subsequent with this semen analysis. But of course, in the intervening time, the real determinant of success, i.e. the female partner's age, has inevitably changed. So that if you're using patients, men, as their own controls in what is a flawed study in terms of its prospective or retrospective nature anyway, then the confounding factor will be female age. And so it's terribly difficult on the basis of semen analysis to prove. Because we know that if you take all comers with that semen analysis and that semen analysis and this one, their results will still be dependent upon female age. Now, since we've had DNA fragmentation testing, I think one can begin to see that better quality sperm produces a better quality outcome. Certainly a better quantity outcome. So the number of live births may well be the quality of those live births too. So we are in a different phase. But if the fertility units have ignored or eschewed the relevance of DNA testing, then it's going to be a little time before this becomes universally available.
I think the other thing to say here is that, I think I was just going to say the recent introduction to sperm DNA fragmentation, and actually that's a wrong statement to say, because sperm DNA fragmentation has actually been known about for a very long period of time. I think the issue is agreeing on a standard approach for the different methodologies that are available for sperm DNA fragmentation. But just coming back to that, the sperm DNA fragmentation clearly is an advanced test beyond a normal semen analysis, and yet we don't necessarily have any funding for doing that within the normal NHS parameters. So with your knowledge, obviously, with seeing lots of men, how do you think getting access to those advanced tests should be considered?
Okay. So if we're talking about widespread uptake of anything, and you guys, and Michael, you particularly know about the commercial world better than I, it's my observation that it needs to be cheap. Right at the top end of the market, of course, it seems to me that the more expensive it is, there are a small group of people who are attracted to it because it's expensive. But that's a small group. And so we want this to be inexpensive. I think it was the chap who invented the light bulb who said, we will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will afford to burn candles.
I think I've heard that.
I've heard that several times.
Yes.
In the current climate, I think I might be going back to candles, actually.
So expense. Then we've got ease, ease of access, but also the ability to get results fairly quickly, because that's the way it is in the world. Actually, it doesn't make a jot of difference whether the result takes 3 days or 3 weeks in the scale of things.
No, but it does to a couple, doesn't it?
The perception.
And
of course, perception becomes reality. So there's cost. But then we've got to, just as Mike was saying, and this again is a fascinating bit of fertility, we've got to choose the test. Now, these tests, DNA fragmentation, have not really been developed by people who used them. Okay, now, this is a very subtle thing and fascinating. So if we talk about a disease, let's talk about a common disease, arthritis, then the doctors who were treating arthritis, maybe rheumatoid arthritis in young people, they would want tests to work out what kind of arthritis it was so that they could treat this person in a different way. So the doctors, would be driving the tests. They would be interacting with their friends in the laboratories and going to meetings, but it would be the doctors who were not demanding, but keen, enthusiastic for more knowledge. Now, this didn't happen with DNA testing, fragmentation testing, because actually the doctors weren't interested. This is a spin-off from laboratory scientists, right? And of course, scientists, as Mike knows, are completely different from doctors. So the scientist says, I've got a test. I've spent my life in this dark, miserable laboratory developing the test, and here it is, and it's the best test. Full stop. But in another country or in another city, there's a very similar scientist who's got a slightly different way of doing it, answers exactly the same. But then that scientist will take on the other scientist and they have a row. Now, there are in fact 4 principal, as Mike knows, as you know, different methods of doing DNA fragmentation. And therefore there are 4 prominent scientists who all aver that their test is best. And of course then we get into a worse situation, because the person who developed the other test that they would say is not so good, becomes a wicked devil from hell. So, and this, had it been that the doctors, the clinicians, developed the test, then it would be far easier to accept it. I mean, I'm sure there are different laboratory methodologies for doing many of the tests that all of us have had, biochemical tests, hematology tests, but nobody questions the methodology.
No.
When you have a full blood count, you don't go back to the doctor and say, well, was it done by,
this laboratory or this laboratory?
Was it done by Smith's apparatus or Brown's? Because I'm not going to listen to Brown's because he's hopeless. I met him. So we have a difficulty. And it probably needs somebody else, specifically not a scientist, or a bit of a scientist, to say, actually, we've looked at all of this, and this one, whatever it is cost effective, not expensive. The results come back quickly, and it's for example, an amalgam of the other methodologies. It's okay. So stop fighting, let's just do it.
And how important are these tests in your clinic in terms of your diagnosis? So we're talking about DNA fragmentation. We're talking about these advanced tests. How important are they in terms of your diagnosis or kind of helping couples on their treatment path?
So, for me, they are very important because I think that they are hugely helpful in understanding the meaning of an abnormal semen analysis and the meaning of a couple's history. And this can be so different. It could be recurrent miscarriage, early miscarriages in a couple who have no difficulty in getting pregnant. It could be the man with quite a reasonable semen analysis, not bad at all. But when you have a look at him, he's got a sizable varicocele, and the DNA fragmentation is not in line with the apparent normality of the semen analysis. So it's very useful. And sometimes, of course, you are surprised that the DNA fragmentation is really quite good. Now, in those men, you'd say, well, perhaps you're not going to have a natural conception because there are only a small number of sperm, but in fact, the ones that are there are pretty good. So you are somebody who should just get on with the ICSI.
Right, yeah.
Now, admittedly, that advice, get on with the ICSI, is universal in the fertility
but too common, one would say.
But actually, in certain cases, it is the right advice.
It is,
and DNA fragmentation helps to elucidate that or reinforce it. But you've got to be careful, because as soon as you talk about DNA, it requires a bit of explanation, because the men begin to think that that's some ghastly abnormality, and they're going to have
it's a
babies.
Big scary word.
They're going to have babies that look peculiar. So one's got to be clear that this is a technical thing, and doesn't relate to the way their children will be in terms of obvious abnormality. Although one has to be a little bit careful. There are relationships between very poor quality sperm as measured by DNA fragmentation and the health of the next generation.
Offspring,
Perhaps not, well, certainly not what the offspring look like. We're not talking about big congenital defects at all, but rather subtle things that might not occur till middle age. So if I could roll the clock forward 10, 15 years, then this will be, I suspect, an extra important use of the DNA fragmentation tests and the tests that may be born from it.
That kind of makes me then think So actually, are we yet to see the long-term implications of ICSI? Is that what we're potentially talking about here? Is where you're then bypassing... You haven't been testing the sperm thoroughly, you haven't been doing DNA fragmentation. Is it potential that we're storing up future health problems?
I think it is.
Okay.
But
I was a bit worried I was out on a tangent there.
But the work that has been done, particularly in Australia, by proper scientists, show really that whilst we can identify an association between some neurological conditions that particularly might be developing a little bit later, late teenagers, even in middle age, possibly conditions that could be said to be on the autism spectrum. The association can be proven, but the numbers are very, very small.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So the percentage risk is tiny, but I think we have to accept the association.
Okay.
Now, that's not quite the same as saying cause and effect.
Yeah. No.
Because, of course, to say cause and effect, you have to know what the cause is.
Yeah.
This is merely an association with something that might be an indicator
Right.
of something that might be slightly more prevalent under these circumstances.
It's a risk. It's a risk, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, and I think whether it's a perceived risk or an actual risk, or whether the risk is really, really low, we need to understand what that potential risk is in order to make good decisions moving forwards, I think, isn't it? So
We've gone off on a bit of a deep tangent here.
yeah,
This is really
no, I
interesting,
like this though. I like
This
this.
is a good tangent. So if you look at worldwide statistics, or as close as we can get to worldwide statistics, so ESHRE, the European Society, gets as much data as it possibly can from fertility units worldwide. And so I think the last time they collected a load of it was about 1.5 million cycles.
Wow. Gosh,
It's a lot of data, yeah.
And the live birth rate was just under 400,000.
What's that
So
as a percentage? I can't do
It's
that.
high 20s.
I was going to say, it would be about... I'd expect it to be about a third, because that's really where...
Yeah, well, it's
IVF
below
is.
that.
Right, wow.
Yeah, worldwide.
Yeah.
Now, what that means, actually, is two things to me. Firstly, it's the only bit of evidence in the entire fertility world that if you do 1.5 million cycles, you'll get 20-something% live births. And that has been the situation for the best part of 30 years.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is evidence. But the other thing it's telling me, and this is sort of pseudoscience, Sunday afternoon, after a good lunch stuff, the other take-home message from that, or conclusion from that, to me, is nature is pretty good, therefore, at defining which embryos should translate to live births.
Interesting, yeah.
Because 3/4 aren't. And almost whatever we do, those 3/4 are not making it.
But you know what, part of me would then say, okay, out of those 1.5 million cycles, how many of the men were assessed and treated properly?
Oh, crikey. Be a tiny number. It'll be, at best, hundreds of thousands.
And if...
But they must will include, loads of men with poor DNA fragmentation.
Well, inevitably we will, and I think one of the big things is that it's often unexplored, undiagnosed, if that's the right word to say, and therefore it's a bit of hidden hope really with fertility clinics to see, well, we'll choose ICSI or a revised form of ICSI to try and get over this male factor issue, subfertility with a semen analysis, but we'll give it a good go. But something needs to change from its status quo that we've got now, though, doesn't there? Because to me, it's unsatisfactory to have 70% failure in this day and age with all the knowledge and all the technology that we have and some very, very, very good scientists and data that is out there. We need to change that.
Yeah, but also these numbers are human beings behind it, right? These are couples that are going through it, and I think if you can aim, even if you're at a fertility clinic, if you can eventually change something like I did and have a natural conception, that's that's a much more beautiful outcome for a couple, because there's that kind of memory, and something that we're very happy about, that we've got we had a natural conception.
And far more cost effective to have a natural
of course
conception than an assisted one.
And if we was to do an IVF round or an ICSI round, that we may have needed, and it gave us a live birth, of course we'd equally be as happy. But it's actually very nice to know that we kind of got the intervention that has cured me. I don't know if that's the right term, but then to then move on to have a natural conception. Because if now we are in a position where we want to future plan more children and grow our family, then we're in a better position to make the choice moving forward. And I think when we talk about IVF, we're always looking at a baby, but actually this is about family planning, isn't it? It's kind of making your future more bright, not just for maybe the first child, but subsequent children afterwards. And if you can improve one's health, that can allow a couple to conceive naturally, then surely that's the ideal outcome, surely, isn't it?
I think we're more likely, or you're more likely with what you're doing, once this is realised with testing, it is more likely, as Toby is saying, that you reduce the numbers of men entering fertility treatment and reduce the numbers of cycles. Now, and that's not quite the same as the live birth outcome from cycles of ICSI. Because I suspect there is something we don't understand about that failure rate. But the trick is not to have to do it so often.
And that's a challenge in itself, isn't it? Because the very nature of what we're trying to achieve with what our mission and goals are is actually to support couples in the first instance by understanding their own health and making sure they can get access to good quality advanced tests, but also to help clinics as well, really, because we want them to be successful in their success rates, their first time conception success rates following an assisted reproductive cycle. And that's the challenge for me, for us, really, I suppose, is saying, if you ignore the clinical evidence, if you ignore the advanced tests that's available to you, then somebody else will have a better success rate with you, because inevitably people will migrate where they're getting a better success rate. And I think certainly in this country, everybody's measured by results, and quite rightly so. The HFEA have records on success rates through fertility clinics. There's a leaderboard out there. And I think those leaderboards are going to change if men are equally assessed, diagnosed, listened to, and are offered advanced tests so that they can be treated as a man for men's health, rather than being treating or manipulating their sample. I think that's the goal, really, that we're trying to achieve here.
I think you're absolutely right, Mike. To be cynical about this and devil's advocate, of course, the problem is that if, as with Toby, there is a fairly straightforward way of improving fertility in a fundamentally fertile man. And that's the secret. You have a family. You are fundamentally fertile. You are not infertile. So if we remove all those guys, because of what you three have done, from the IVF ICSI frame, then of course that headline success rate will go down. Because they are no longer treating, in inverted commas, fundamentally fertile people. So therefore we're left with a far harder ask.
Yeah, I thought of it that way around.
And that is really quite interesting.
And then of course we've got the problem in many fields, commercial fields, of quality versus quantity. Because at the moment the funding of fertility units, indeed, whether they be government funded or private equity funded, is based upon a certain quantity. And when that quantity goes down, because there are a bunch of Tobys who've done it naturally, and we're therefore left with more difficult things to try to get round, whether it be choosing sperm in the lab, whether it be trying to improve DNA fragmentation before the cycle, then what may happen is that in the first cycle, the success rate goes up to 40%. But then we're left with really difficult cases who, frankly, are far less likely to succeed. So that the headline, if you look at all comers, drops considerably.
It's a bit of a bombshell, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a bit of a bombshell. My goodness, I'm trying to still compute that one.
Yeah, but it's really important to note, isn't it? Because ultimately, it's about the couple, the patient, the people behind it, and whatever the ultimate outcome will be. I think it's really important for that couple to understand fully their health in order to determine how fertile or infertile that individual is or that couple is. And regardless of all those numbers, one can feel much happier moving forward with their life, knowing that everything has then therefore been done and all the resources are exhausted, and they know for their future that they've done everything. I think so many couples are childless not by choice and have that kind of, quote, unexplained infertility. That's a huge disservice to patients, because it's really confusing to move on with your life if you've just got that constant cloud of what if, and could this have been a different outcome? Should we have known about these tests or whatever prior to the body clock ending? So I think it's really important to note that there are human beings and patients behind this, and it's great that so much is being done right now to give people the very best opportunity that they deserve, right?
No, I think you're absolutely right, and you touch upon the casual use of the word unexplained, which once again in the rest of medicine, you wouldn't really casually use it.
No,
unexplained,
idiopathic.
Really
they're great names, aren't they? But it's only because we've not done enough testing and diagnosed correctly.
Sure, you've got dreadful abdominal pain. I'm so sorry you've got this awful abdominal pain. I haven't got a clue what it's about, but I can say that you'll be fixed by the operation. Well, not quite fixed, because it's only going to work in 30% of people like you. Well, I mean, that won't do, will it? So the bloke says, well, what about the other 70%? So you say, well, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd just be unlucky, won't you?
God,
I mean, it is, but like everything else, it's easy for me to say, this is bonkers, but actually we've just got into the habit of doing that. It's not meant in a nasty way. No. It is genuinely the case that if you've got unexplained infertility, you may do better with ICSI. And there is, in inverted commas, evidence to show that. Now, of course, we can postulate that the reason for that is that actually you do have raised DNA fragmentation, and that to a certain extent, sperm choice will overcome whatever was causing that fragmentation, maybe a varicocele. So it's not an untruth, it's just unsatisfactory to describe it that way.
Yeah. And I was computing those numbers that you were describing earlier, Jonathan, and I was thinking, do you know what? I think the same numbers are actually going to come through the doors of physicians, GPs, and into the fertility clinics, but actually the referral pathway just needs to change, doesn't it? Whereby, men need to go through a multidisciplinary, sort of team, and just be assessed slightly differently to where they're being assessed at the moment and being treated the way in which they're being treated at the moment. So rather than going through a fertility cycle, if fertility clinics suddenly had access to an andrologist, urologist that could see that male partner, surely the same numbers are coming through, so the business model doesn't change, but the type of physician that the patient goes to is just going to change slightly, and therefore, working together as a team, the results are often going to be a lot better. Isn't that would that work?
Yes, but you'll still be removing some of the best contestants, like Toby. They'll be grinning leaving the place
Yes.
and having a natural conception.
Yeah.
And there'll be quite a few of those.
Yeah.
Now, that statement that I just made would be hotly denied, of course, by the biggest fertility units. But they will say, well, the evidence is. Well, we've kicked around this word evidence. You see, we're in an evidence-free zone, really.
Yeah.
And it's even difficult to get the evidence about varicocele.
Yes.
It's really, really difficult to get
Yeah.
hard evidence.
I know. I've come across that objection a few times. Where's the randomised controlled trials on the impact of varicocele repair and fertility outcomes?
There is.
My heart sinks. You go like, my goodness, where is the evidence that ICSI was actually going to fundamentally change outcomes for for a couple's fertility 30 years ago? No, there wasn't any. Come on.
And you can't do, of course, the randomised prospective control trial because there's the couple sitting in front of you. And if you say whether this is NHS or private practice, well, you say, I've got a great idea. We're going to decide what treatment you two get by me tossing a coin. That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
And I commend this idea to both of you.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to get anywhere.
No.
Yeah.
So
You're not going to go to the casino and say, we're going to spin on the wheel for our fertility outcomes.
Yeah.
This is our family planning on the wheel. Just you wouldn't do it, would you?
But also just even I suppose you can normalise this, but even within a randomised control trial, you can have so many other variables on the female side anyway, aren't you?
Yeah,
of course.
So it's very complex to try and prove something in that.
But you don't even begin to randomise.
No.
It's the randomisation that you can't
even
do.
that.
Yeah. You need to look at things differently, though, and the questions from physicians need to change slightly as well, I think, in this manner, because, randomised controlled trials in this manner, when you're talking about couples' fertility, don't work. Let's be realistic about, outcome data, but let's have a look at the outcome data that, where studies have shown that varicocele can have an improvement in seminal parameters, perhaps, and the outcome that may offer. Because if we don't consider it right at the beginning as a treatment, as a sort of a pathway for referral, then we're just going to stay where we are and nothing will change.
No, you're absolutely right. So and I suspect this is true of many specialties and many professions, many businesses even, which is that if you were going to stick to the evidence, we're talking about varicocele, and the evidence, in inverted commas, which defined NICE's views about not treating varicoceles, that evidence came from a publication which was called a meta-analysis, which is an amalgam of all the data
studies.
out there.
Yeah.
In about the early 2000s, 2004, 2005, which said that treating varicoceles didn't make any difference. Now, what, of course, happened, which was those who were the policy makers actually breathed a sigh of relief. And they thought, oh, thank God for that. So all the gynecologists, that's something that we genuinely don't have to worry about. We can tell the patients there is no evidence that, and so we don't have to have a rummage in the scrotum. We can just forget all of that and carry on with the IVF. And government, the people who were producing money, also breathed a sigh of relief. They said, we take advice from the people doing the fertility, who are the gynecologists. If they tell us that the solution to this problem, this public health issue of infertility, is just to do IVF cycles, we will ask them, what does an IVF cycle cost? They will say, price and cost is a bit different, but £2,000 or £3,000. And we will say, the politicians, the funders, so how many succeed? And the gynecologists say, well, about 30%. So the politician says, oh, well, that sounds quite good. That's quite cheap, really.
Wow.
£2,000 or £3,000 for a 30% success rate. And he's, may not say, but he's also thinking, and these young people don't vote anyway. So good.
Yeah.
Done deal.
Yeah. And what's really interesting here is that there is an opportunity in the next 2 years, because there is a nice review of the fertility guidelines, to think about, more half of the equation, really, I think, about men and, male health and andrology. And I'm quite encouraged that there is some urological andrology input stakeholders in this next review. Now, it's going to take some time, but, I'm hopeful that, men get a better deal out of these nice guidelines. But, one of the things I forgot to mention is that we've mentioned varicocele numerous times. What is the percentage of this idiopathic or unknown male infertility? What does varicocele represent in your mind?
So the prevalence of varicocele is somewhere between 11 and 15%. It's quite high, therefore.
That's the general population, isn't it?
Yeah, that's of males.
Of men.
Of course, because they're the only ones with a testicle.
But just clarifying that it wasn't in the fertility population. This is 11 to 15% in just any old bloke wandering around.
And this was originally defined by an army doctor in America in the Walter Reed Army Hospital. It was huge in the days when the army had great big facilities, and of course loads of soldiers, loads of recruits. Yeah. And this was his life's work. He reported on 5,000 scrotums.
Wow.
I mean, let's imagine 5,000 scrotums.
Or not. At this time of the morning.
Almost fill the room.
On that bombshell.
Okay, yeah. So, and there was the incidence, and this has been repeated often. So it's quite a lot.
It's quite common then.
Okay. So what about the fertile population? Well, if you compare the fertile population with the infertile population, then in the infertile population, and just as Ian was saying, of course, it's very difficult to correct absolutely for the women. But if you look at men who are part of a sub or infertile union, then 40% of them will have a varicocele.
Gosh, so it shoots up, doesn't it? Yeah.
But of course, that is skewed for other reasons, which could be female. Yeah. It could be in the last couple of years that this man isn't actually infertile, but he just had COVID a couple of times, for example. So again, it's quite difficult to be sure about those figures. But I have no doubt that varicoceles of a certain size, because you measure the veins with ultrasound, associated with poor fragmentation, are highly relevant to male fertility.
And you know what? I think we're going to have to stop at that point, because that would be another hour or two just on varicocele. We're very aware of your time, Jonathan. You've got to get off to clinic and do wonderful things with men. Can you come back and talk varicocele with us another day?
Oh, absolutely. This is what I was only just getting going.
I know. We could be here all day. There's sort of several episodes that we could capture through just today's
absolutely
episode.
So. I wasn't expecting the conversation to go where it's gone today.
Oh, it's been an amazing conversation.
It's been a journey, hasn't it? Again.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you so much for your time today. Honestly, it's so great to have you on our podcast, and we look forward to welcoming you back on another episode.
It's very nice for me to talk to normal people.
Are we normal though? That's the
we're probably abnormal because two patients that's both been seen by Jonathan. Right. But just genuinely a big thank you for all the work that you do and the inspiration that gives to us, in carrying out this mission. So thank you.
Good.
We'll see you again.
Thanks for the invitation. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Cheers.
And that's it for today's episode. Join us next month on our next episode of the Test Him podcast. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn at Test Him Limited.
And YouTube.
And YouTube
as well.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Have an awesome day. Let's talk sperm another time. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.